Hello, my name is Sabah Anise, and I am a member of the Dole Institute Student Advisory Board. Welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics, and thank you for attending this evening's program. The Dole Institute Student Advisory Board is comprised of KU students committed to the bipartisan mission of the Dole Institute. Members of the SAB receive great opportunities to network with our special guests and preference when applying for our internship assistance program on or for paid student positions at the Institute. If you're a student and would like to join, please contact the Dole Institute. The Dole Institute would like to hear from you. If you're enjoying this evening's program, please let us know by contacting us on Facebook, Twitter, or through our website email. To view past programs, visit our online video archive at www.doleinstitute.org. Before we begin tonight, I'd like to remind you to please turn off your cell phones. After the interview, we will have some time for audience questions and answers. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and a student helper with a microphone will come to you. Please ask just one brief question. Hearing assistance is available, and we have a loop seating section at each program designated by a sign. If you have any questions about the loop, or if at any time during the program you have difficulty hearing, please alert one of our staff members or student volunteers here in the hall, and they can assist. And now, please welcome Director Bill Lacey.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for coming out for this important series, the third part of our presidential lecture series for 2015, the First Woman President 2.0. I think we've covered this before, but some of you may not be aware. We ran a similar series 9 years ago in 2006, titled simply The First Woman President. And Barbara Ballard and I and some others on our team agreed that it was an ideal time to take another in-depth look at this topic. And we've done 2 programs and they've been delightful, and tonight's will be terrific as well. Tonight's program will look at women in leadership of legislatures, legislative leadership. And I think that's a different perspective than we've taken in our first 2 programs, and one that's very important and will be very interesting. I'll begin by saying that our discussion will be led by our Associate Director, Representative Barbara Ballard, who was instrumental in organizing this series. Our 3 guests as part of Dr. Ballard's panel tonight: Representative Gilda Cobb-Hunter has served in the South Carolina House of Representatives since 1992, serving as House Minority Leader from 1997 to 2000. She's a member of the Democratic National Committee and chairs its Southern Caucus of the Democratic National Party. Representative Cobb-Hunter also serves as a member of the DNC's Executive Committee. In the center, Beka Romm specializes in public affairs and grassroots advocacy campaigns at Hickam Public Affairs. Previously, Romm directed the Kansas and Missouri offices of American Majority, a nonpartisan organization dedicated to training conservative activists. I'm very pleased to say that Ms. Romm was actively involved here as a KU student at the Dole Institute, served on our Student Advisory Board for 4 years, and served as the student coordinator of the Student Advisory Board, and it's great to have her back tonight as a speaker, now a political practitioner. And our final guest, a good friend of the Dole Institute, Joan Wagnon chairs the Kansas Democratic Party. She served in the Kansas State House of Representatives and is the first and only woman to serve as mayor of Topeka since the city's incorporation. Ms. Wagnon has worked as a school teacher, medical researcher, and community volunteer, and taught at Washburn University. As I said, Dr. Ballard will be moderating the discussion. Please welcome our guests to the Dole Institute and the University of Kansas.
Good evening, and I'll say thank you so very much for your attendance this evening. I will go right into our programs. And I will ask each one of our panelists, because there was a reason why we chose each one of them. Would you tell us about your family background, including where you were born, your educational background, and any siblings you might have? Jim.
Then I'll start. I was born in Texarkana, Arkansas, right on the Arkansas-Texas border. I have one sister who still lives in Texarkana, and I was educated at Hendrix College in Arkansas, in Conway, and I received a master's degree in counseling from the University of Missouri. We moved to Topeka in 1968, and we have now bought cemetery plots, so I consider myself a real Kansan.
Very good. I was born in a small town called Bennington in the middle of the state of Kansas, a town of about 600 people. I am the second eldest of 14 children, and 9 of those were brothers. And so when people ask me why I got into politics, I often say, having 9 brothers every day was a political negotiation. That's right. I'm a graduate of the University of Kansas and have lived in Lawrence ever since.
I was born in a little small town in Florida called Gifford. It's in Indian River County, near Vero Beach and Fort Pierce. I am the middle child in a family of 7. I am a proud graduate of Florida A&M University and Florida State University.
Well, let me ask you, get right down to it. Why did you choose to run for public office, or why did you choose to go into the political arena?
Starting on this end.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I never wanted to be in office. I've always been fancied myself as a behind-the-scenes person. I never wanted the whole public business that's associated with running for office. Long story short, the time came and I was told it's time for you to put your money where your mouth is. I've done a lot of work organizing women of color into a political network. Just when my husband and I moved to South Carolina, my observation was that there were a lot of women who were behind the scenes doing all the work. The guys were in office, and it was like, something's wrong with this picture. The opportunity presented itself, and people were like, okay, it's your time. I prayed about it, talked it over with my husband, and he said, as long as you don't expect me to be out there with you, you go for it. I never thought I'd win. In South Carolina, there is a saying, come here, can't do like been here. It's a Gullah saying, meaning native born have certain rights or whatever. So I never thought I'd win because I'm not a native South Carolinian. Plus, I had 3 names. And back then, while it's not, it's commonplace now, back in 91, 92, it was real different to see a woman with 3 names and have a woman insist on having 3 names. But I ran because I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to be the voice of people who have no voice.
I chose politics as a little bit of an accident, I think, but the reason that I'm excited to be in politics and the reason that I've stayed involved in politics is that I'm the daughter of a small business owner. And growing up with a father who owned a small business, you see very quickly how things that people do in government on the local level, on the state level, on the federal level, affect people's real lives in real ways. And so I see politics as a hands-on process in which you can make people's lives better or worse, but hopefully through the work that we do every day, make people's lives much better.
Well, Beka, we share a lot in common. Although I grew up in a family that talked about politics and liked Harry Truman as president, and we talked about politics a lot, I never thought about a career in politics. I was running the YWCA and very much involved in advocacy on issue kinds of things. And I ran other people's campaigns. I ran a school board race. My Sunday school classmate was running, and I thought, okay, I can organize that. And I was down in Arkansas visiting my family, and one of the legislators that had represented our area suddenly withdrew. This was after the primary and right before Labor Day. And so there was a notice in the newspaper that said, the husband of Joan Wagnon says that she will run for the state legislature. So my husband, Bill, threw my hat in the ring, and we got organized, and in the space of a few short months, won that first race. And I ran 6 times after that for the legislature. Wow. So politics is a family affair for us.
All right. A Rutgers study states that women legislators are more likely to say that they decided to seek elective office after receiving the suggestion to run, whereas men are more likely to say that decision to run was entirely their idea. What do you have to say about the idea that women need to be recruited to run for office?
I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think in my own case, for example, it was something that I had never really thought about. People approached me because of the work I had done organizing the Women of Color Political Network and suggested that I do that. That's been 20 plus years ago. I'd like to think, particularly when I meet and hear people like Beka, that that has changed and that women are now not waiting to be asked or to be told, but are being more assertive in deciding that that is something that they need to do. I would hope 20 years later it's a little different.
Well, I hope before Beka answers, I will say to you that she does a lot of training of candidates
Good.
and everything else. So, what would you say to that answer?
In my experience, I'm like you. I wish that more women would look themselves in the mirror and say, I can take on these problems and I can figure out the solution to these challenges. What I've found is that quite often women, I use this phrase a lot, I used it at dinner, women's headspace is taken up. To give you an example, my headspace is taken up on a daily basis by the fact that I have a full-time job and a marriage and a mortgage and a 2-year-old who needs to be transitioned out of his crib and into a big boy bed and probably needs to be potty trained sometime before college, and a new baby on the way, and home decisions to make. And so women, we know this in their daily lives, in their families, whether it's caring for elderly parents, whether it's raising children of their own, whether it's their communities, the families that they've chosen. We know that women have a lot of hats that they wear and a lot of roles that they play. And that headspace, I think, very often gets taken up simply by a very, very long to-do list and a lot of tasks that they have to accomplish. And what I have found is that if someone steps intentionally into that headspace and says, you should run for office, that quite often it seems like the most obvious thing in the world to that woman once someone suggests it to her. But I think that sometimes the distractions of daily life just simply keep a woman from coming to that on her own.
Well, I think timing is always a big issue. It was easier for me to make a decision to run at the age of 40 because my kids were not little. Women today are making the decision to run even if they have small children at home. It's nice to be asked. It's nice to have someone say, I think you would make a good representative. And that was in part what it took to get me in the race. And as I recruit lots of candidates across the state, that is often what it takes to get them in the race, both men and women. I think women are less reluctant today to run than they used to be. There are more women who are willing to throw their hat in the ring, but it's still nice to be asked, and it has to be at the right time.
Well, we've heard people say women have so many things to do, so many hats that you're wearing and everything else. So being busy, how do you handle the demands on your time?
Okay, I'll take that. If you're a busy person, you are used to juggling things. And if it is important for you to be involved in the political life, then you figure out how to do it. And I think it's just that simple. If it's the wrong time in your life and you're overcommitted, you're not going to do it. But if you're interested, you will figure out a way to make it work for you.
Okay, Beka?
I would agree with that. I think that's absolutely true. And I think that, today we have a lot of tools at our disposal. My husband and I use Google Calendar on our iPhones constantly, and my boss and I use Google Calendar on our iPhones as well. And so some things have gotten much easier with technology adapting and growing and being able to use tools that make life a little bit easier to schedule. But it's also, I think, created new challenges in that we're all connected to our phones all the time, and you can't get away from it. And so it's a blessing and a beast, but I think that what Joan said is exactly right, which is that if it's something that's important to you, you can find the time in your day for it.
And I would agree with both my colleagues here on the panel. Quite frankly, busy people are the ones who usually do things. And because you're busy, you are just used to doing things. So I think it's just a matter of prioritizing what is important to you. The one thing that I think all three of us might relate to, and something that the public doesn't really focus on, is what a sacrifice it is for family members who happen to have people who are in public service or public office. It's a tremendous sacrifice for families, and not enough attention is paid to family members who also want some of our time. But it's just a matter of just deciding what's important to you and recognizing that you can only do so much. That comes after a while, maturation, I should say, and you just do what needs to be done and really don't think a lot about it.
Okay. I'm reading a book on Eleanor Roosevelt right now, and it's by, for people who want to know, Robin Gerber. And Eleanor Roosevelt she became a leader in her own right, but then she wanted other women to participate in leadership as well. And she has a quote: "If we are still a negligible factor, ignored and neglected, we must be prepared to admit in what we have ourselves failed." Her call is as relevant and as clear today as it was in the late 1920s. She sought to motivate more women to find their passion for life. And when you have a passion, you're willing to sacrifice a lot. So my question to you, and I'll start with Beka, what is your passion?
I think I might have given this away a little bit at the beginning. I love small businesses. It motivates me. It makes me very, very excited to think about the ways that small business can grow and adapt in our state, the ways in which we can shape policies to help those businesses to grow and thrive. You know, Kansas is a state that has a lot of small businesses, but we're also seeing nationally more and more women starting small businesses. The most recent number that I saw was 1,200 new small businesses started every day that are owned by women. And I think that that's fantastic. It shows that women are willing to rewrite the rules when they don't like the game that they're playing. It shows that they're willing to take risks. And it shows that they're willing to take control of their own destiny. And man or woman, that's something that I love to be engaged in, and that I love to talk about.
I've forgotten the question.
What's your passion?
I was so listening.
What's your passion?
Oh, what's my passion? It's public policy, without a doubt. I ran the YWCA in Topeka for 16 years, and I think that's what really got me involved, because I understood at some point that it's easier to vote on an issue than to watch and try to encourage somebody else to vote on the issue. I remember standing in front of the all-white male Senate Judiciary Committee in about 1976, when we were trying to get domestic violence legislation passed. And that's what compelled me to get involved. They didn't vote the way I wanted to, and it finally occurred to me that women really need to get in there and mix it up if you're going to change things. And I like to look back and think there was an awful lot of legislation that came about because in the 80s and in the 90s, we had an ever-increasing large number of women who could vote on some issues. Now, they didn't all vote alike on every issue, but they moved things forward that wouldn't have happened otherwise.
I think my passion is just helping people. I'm a social worker by profession, and I get a real big kick out of making a difference for people who have no voice. I fashion myself because I am from a working class background. I like to help people who don't have access. People with money don't need a loudmouth like me because they get their calls returned. I deal with victims of violence every day. I've spent the last 30 plus years working with victims of domestic violence, sexual assault and all of that. And just by nature, I am one who fights for the underdog. And what I've discovered is that when you're in politics, most people have politicians on some level that is really not very realistic. So part of my passion is demystifying this notion of people who serve in public office. I like to tell people there is absolutely nothing special about any of us who are blessed and highly favored enough to have been elected. We, in the case of South Carolina, are just fortunate enough that on election day, 50 plus 1% of the people thought that we would do a good job. And I think that's important for us to not put politicians or elected officials on a pedestal, because when you do that, you, I believe, contribute to this notion of people who've lost touch once they get out of office. So I'm a helper by nature, and I've discovered that being in elected office helps me help the little people. I have been able to acquire the kind of power and influence that makes a difference for people who really would not have had a chance were it not for somebody like me.
I looked up the definition of passion, and it's interesting. It says it doesn't have to be connected to humanitarian goals, but it must be deeply personal and important to you. And I think you heard all three talk about it was personal and it was important to them. Now we're going to switch up when we start talking about women running and who most of the incumbents are. Because most incumbents are men, and incumbents typically win re-election. Incumbency is often thought of as a significant barrier to increasing women's representation in the legislature or in Congress. Mm-hmm. How do we address this structural barrier? Mm-hmm. You're on, Gilda.
Oh my. Well, we just have to hit it and just keep focused and just keep punching at it. Incumbency is something that really we have to not underestimate, because whether you're talking state level or federal, what you'll find is that most people like their particular representative. It's the other guy or girl that they have problems with. So the whole value of incumbency is something that has to be taken into account. I'm just a firm believer that nothing beats a failure but a try. And you can sit and have your pity party and, oh, woe is me, but in order to really affect change, you've got to figure out how to get women, particularly women of color, to just dig down deep and decide, I'm going to take this on and just try to be the exception to the rule. I just believe very firmly, you look at somebody like Abraham Lincoln and others in history who ran for a number of times before they were successful. And I just think it's important that if you offer to run, if you offer for public office, you ought to be prepared to lose. There is value in losing, and I think every time you lose, you learn a lesson that kind of helps you win the next time. So it's a matter of being patient and persistent and staying focused. You eat an elephant, no pun intended, Beka, but one bite at a time. You're a Republican,
That's right?
right?
Yes,
okay.
Well, you're on, Beka.
I think that incumbency is obviously a huge hurdle. I think that one thing that perhaps we as a society don't do enough, you're taught to be polite and you're taught not to talk about politics and religion. But what happens sometimes is that then when you are a brand new candidate, you think that you can only talk about politics with political people. And the reality is that each one of us has a personal network that is deep and that is wide. And if you are uncomfortable talking about the fact that you're running for office and what it is that you want to achieve in office at your Sunday school class or at your Bible study, or if you're uncomfortable talking about that with people who you work with or people who you serve on a board with as a volunteer in your community, you are going to really struggle with taking on that incumbent. But if you're willing to take your political risk and go out there and talk to everyone in your personal network, what I have seen is that in reality, we're all much more connected than we think. You know, they say there's 6 degrees of separation. If you think about it, you're never more than 6 degrees away from that really amazing person on a pedestal that has all the money in town that could write you a really big check for your campaign. And sometimes I think that first-time candidates, they're just intimidated and they're afraid to reach out to their personal network. And I think that that's to their detriment, and it's something that I always really encourage first-time candidates to do. You know, talk to your sister-in-law about politics. Maybe you fought with her about it at Thanksgiving one year, but you should talk to her about it again.
I take a slightly different view, although I agree with what Beka just said about what first-time candidates need to do. I testified this past week on 4 bills in the Elections Committee in the House that sought to allow candidates to transfer money from one race to another, that raised campaign limits and did a variety of other things. We need to be sure that our election laws are absolutely neutral with respect to candidates, because if a challenger comes along, money is what's going to make the difference between challenging an incumbent and not. And if we have open seats, which are the best chance for women to get elected in an open seat, we need to make sure that we haven't built in an advantage for an incumbent to transfer their campaign funds and hang on to that money so that they can move from the House to the Senate or from the school board to wherever. So that's one thing. I think incumbency is something that when I recruit candidates, they've got to be willing to watch and see what that incumbent has done. And the willingness to talk about an incumbent's record is oftentimes not something that a new candidate feels comfortable as doing, but a candidate's record is fair game. And we've got to get over that, because people who serve a long time sometimes need to be replaced. And that applies to Democrats and Republicans.
Amen.
So how we go about funding our campaigns, training our candidates, and not assuming that incumbency means you're there in perpetuity is important. I believe democracy is best served when there is a diversity of ideas and a diversity of people who are making decisions. And the best thing that can happen is that we have an ever-changing group of people. That happens in the Kansas legislature. It does not happen in Congress.
Or in some state legislatures, like South Carolina. There's this notion, and I agree with what both of them have said, but there's this notion that we need to disavow people of, that the seat belongs to that individual member. The seat doesn't belong to that member, whether it's Congress, the General Assembly, school boards, town council, whatever. The seat belongs to the people, and they have a right under our system at any point to make a change.
Okay. What can parties do to be more proactive in recruiting women candidates?
Okay, I went first last time. Y'all need
Okay,
to decide.
you're talking about parties. That's kind of my bailiwick.
Yeah, you're the chairman.
I think, first of all, you have to be intentional about making sure that you're not just taking the first name that comes forward. We work through, and I don't know if the Republican Party works like the Democrat Party does. I have a feeling it does, that we work through our county chairs. And we start with people at the local level and say, we want to find candidates for school boards. We want to find candidates who will run for city commission. We look for people that have some experience. So by doing that, you've automatically limited your population, perhaps, to not all the women that are out there. So then I think you have to go beyond that and say, who are the leaders in this community? And they may be in a church group, they may be in a sorority, they may be in a YWCA or some other kind of organization. Today they could be in the Rotary Club. I mean, wherever they are, you need to look for people that have leadership, and you need to vet those candidates and then stick with them and help them get involved. But I think if you're not saying to myself or yourself, I need to make sure I've got persons of color. I need to make sure I've got women candidates that are running. I need to make sure that I have diversity that represents this district and the state as a whole. Then you're doing a disservice if you just take the first candidate that declares.
Okay, Beka?
I would agree with everything that you just said. In fact, I think that some of the best places to find candidates, in addition to places like Rotary clubs and perhaps the board of your local church organization, I've always found great success with homeowners associations.
Good.
Because what happens? Somebody in the neighborhood notices a problem. Somebody decides, I'm going to be the person to fix that. They get on the board of their homeowners association. And what happens now? They know all their neighbors, which is a great starting point for getting to know everybody in the district and getting out and about and talking to people. And so I agree that very often I think, to our party's detriments, both parties take the easy way out. You know, if you've got 125 House members and you're frantically looking for candidates in the last few weeks before the filing deadline, it becomes quite tempting to get that first name and check that district off the list.
Yeah.
But what happens sometimes when you do that is you can get really terrible candidates, and you can also get candidates who perhaps shouldn't move up from their city commission. Maybe they're doing a great job there and they're needed on that board. And maybe there's somebody else that they could put forward that can go up to the state level, for example, and make a difference. And so I think a big part of it is being organized and looking at things like filing deadlines ahead of time and trying to make sure that you're looking in a variety of areas to find those candidates. We do have a great system where you can move up. Perhaps, you know, you're on your school board and you move up to state legislature or something like that. But it doesn't always have to take that avenue in order to be successful. And I think that sometimes it's very easy to forget that.
And your question is, what should parties do?
Yeah. What role should parties play in helping to recruit women candidates?
Well, theoretically, parties should be the recruiter of candidates. Unfortunately, my experience, particularly with the Democratic Party, has been that we do a really poor job of recruiting candidates. We have allowed the Republican Party to eat our lunch when it comes to a bench, a farm team, for example. Democrats tend to be comfortable with the known. It's kind of like your comfort level. You don't stray outside of your comfort level. And so my experience has been that what we as Democrats do is we tend to stick with the familiar, stick with the legacy family, somebody who's run before and their family member or whatever. Or we don't, in my view, do enough to identify new and emerging leaders. We tend to stick with the tried and true. I think that's a part of why we have become, in some states, quite stagnant, and our numbers are not growing. We really need to value new people. And when I say new, I'm not talking necessarily about young people. I like young people, but I do believe that youth is wasted on the young. And so, quite frankly, we as Democrats need to do a better job of reaching beyond our comfort level and trying to identify new people, particularly when you look at the change in demographics in this country. We have populations of color that are ripe for being enticed to become Democrats. But I'll just end my comments by saying, in order for us to be effective recruiters, we first must understand what we stand for and what our message is. And in my view, we as Democrats have allowed Republicans to define us rather than us defining ourselves. And that definition and the reality does not always match.
Okay. So give me some characteristics of a successful woman who wants to be elected or just serve in a leadership role. What kind of woman are we looking for? What must she possess?
It's my belief that first and foremost, she must possess a true understanding of herself. And I think that's true for men and women. But you need to be genuine if you're going to seek elected office or seek to be a leader. People see through fake very quickly, and if you're not in it for the right reasons, you're not going to be effective. And so I think the very first thing is to be genuine and know why it is that you want to get involved. One of the things that I tell people often is that, no offense to the men in the audience, but sometimes men enter the political sphere to be somebody. And I think that sometimes women enter the political world to do something. And there are obviously exceptions to both of those rules. But doing something, achieving something, helping people in some way, I think is a much better goal to enter the political world with than wanting to be somebody. And so I think that the very first thing that I look for in a candidate is if they have a genuine idea of who they are and what it is that they want to accomplish. Because I think a lot of things come from that. I think being approachable comes from that. I think being teachable comes from that. And I think being committed to the long-term goal comes from that. You know, we've talked about the challenges of incumbency. If a woman is committed to a goal and truly knows what it is that she wants to achieve and what it is that she is in this for, she's going to be able to tough out a difficult campaign. She's going to be able to handle one, maybe two losses before she has an eventual victory. But I think it all starts with looking in the mirror and truly understanding why it is that you want to be involved.
Okay, Joan?
Well, I find it hard to add to that, because I think you're absolutely right. In terms of being authentic, that's important. But I guess the one thing that I would add is that it takes at some point a certain amount of information. And I think you have to be willing to learn. You have to be willing to learn as much as you can about what you're trying to do and be open to where you need to go. I ended up chairing the tax committee in the House. That is about the last place I ever thought for a biology major that I would end up. But you have to be open to seizing those opportunities that come when you get there. And you have to know where you're going. You're absolutely right. But you have to be open to growing and to learning new things along the way.
Since you said tax, you were Secretary of Revenue.
Yes, I was.
I guess you were glad you were on tax.
I was glad because it gave me the background that I needed to be able to run that agency. Given the state's current fiscal circumstances, I'm glad I'm not the Secretary of No Revenue.
Okay, what would you say?
I think for women to be effective leaders, you have to have a certain degree of self-confidence. You have to know who you are and whose you are. And by that, I mean you have to be very, very clear on why you're there in the first place. I've found that it's important to understand the difference in being popular and doing the right thing. It's important to know the difference in being focused on winning and doing the right thing. So I've just always felt that leadership is something that does not come easily for people who just want to be liked and who want to be popular. Doesn't take much leadership to do what everybody else is doing. So I've found that a healthy dose of self-confidence, as well as recognizing that this too shall pass and that you are there to do a job and to do it as well as you can. But you got to have a thick skin if you're in leadership, whether you're male or female. And so you can't take things personally. My husband always uses the analogy for me that politics is all a game. It's just one move, you know, it's all a game. And when you take yourself or it too seriously, you tend to start doing things that are not necessarily in the best interest of the people who sent you there. I am always nervous about ambitious politicians because that to me suggests that there are very few things that an ambitious politician will not do. Somebody who's always looking for the next position, for the next move. It's always an agenda. So I think leadership is tough. It's a good thing, but if you are leading and you look around and nobody's following you, quite frankly, you're just going for a walk, as they say, you know?
Well,
Makes
since
sense.
we've talked about women, what they should be doing and everything else, I want you to look over this audience. Very diverse this evening. I want you to make your best argument for why each of these people out here should think about running for an office, helping somebody for an office, and not relying on, well, you know, I really don't care for politics. Make your best case. Beka, jump on it.
You know, I think that the reason that we don't have more people involved in politics is that, again, they see it as separate from their daily lives. But I think that each and every one of you seated in this audience has something that you care very, very much about, something that you think about when you wake up in the morning, and something that you think about when you're getting ready to go to bed at night. And I would challenge you to find anything that is of that magnitude to you that is not touched in some way by politics. Whatever it may be, it's touched by the political realities that we live in. If it's your family, if it's your job, if it's your city, if it's your local community, if it's your education, it doesn't matter what it is that matters to you. I can guarantee you that there are people making decisions about whatever that is that are going to affect you. And if it's going to affect you, you ought to be involved in it.
Okay, John?
Well, if it's going to affect you, you do need to be involved in it, and you probably are sitting here because you are fascinated by or interested in what's going on. And our best candidates that we recruit come from people just like you. We can teach you how to do a campaign. We can teach you the mechanics of communicating to an audience, of running for an office. We can even teach you about the issues. But what we can't teach you is that sense of concern that you have for your civic responsibility to make the world a better place in which to live. And that's all of you who are sitting out here. And I say to you, if you don't like what's going on in Kansas right now, then I've got a slot that maybe we could fill. Now, everybody from Lawrence can't run, because you only have 3, and Barbara's got one of them, and she's not she's not giving up that seat. But there's a way in which we can get all of you involved, and the best candidates come from people that never thought they were going to take on a political office. I think the other reason, just very quickly, that people don't get involved is because it's scary, and they don't like the conflict. I don't know how many times people have said to me over the years, I don't know how you stand doing this, because I don't know how you take the conflict. And they do, there is a lot of conflict, and you have to be willing to stand up for what you believe, and you have to be willing to have people get in your face sometimes, and you have to be willing for people to write ugly things about you in the newspaper. But it doesn't hurt, and you get over it, and it does make a difference. And the only thing that does make a difference is what Margaret Mead has often said, you know, for change to occur, good people have to do something, and that's you, whatever that role might be.
Okay, Gilda.
I would say to y'all, you know, to whom much is given, much is required. We live in America, the greatest country in the world, and there is just something to be said for involvement. For those of you who think politics has absolutely, well, clearly that doesn't apply to y'all because you're in here, as they've said, but for those people you know who may think that politics has absolutely nothing to do with their everyday living, I would remind you that at some point in our history, some politician decided when you come into this world, you have to have what? A birth certificate. When you leave this world, you have to have a death certificate. Politics governs our coming, our going, and everything in between. And quite frankly, if you don't like the system, it becomes your responsibility to try to change it. Period. It is too easy to point fingers. I am one who always follows the notion of looking at that face in the mirror and asking that face in the mirror, what have you done to make a difference? What do you plan to do to make a difference. It's real easy to point fingers at people who have had the courage to get into the arena, as the old adage goes. If you aren't even willing to get into the arena, how do you expect to win the fight? So I'm all about people doing something other than whining and complaining about those people who have chosen to try to make a difference.
All right, you can clap. I saw it was really oh, yeah. All right. Well, you know, Joan touched on it. That was my next question. And I have one more question before we open it up. Sometimes we must accept conflict as inevitable. And often women will say, oh, I don't like conflict. I just don't like conflict. But as Joan was just saying, sometimes you have to have conflict. You can add to it if you want. But Beka, what would you say about conflict?
I'm a difficult person to ask about this because I grew up with 9 brothers. Conflict was constant. You had to protect your territory. No, what I would say to a woman who doesn't like conflict is that I would just echo what Gilda said earlier. Politics is a game. If you take things personally, if you take every debate on the House floor personally, if you take every committee action personally, if I as a lobbyist look at legislators perhaps voting against my bill and take it personally, I'm not going to be very effective because we're going to begin to have personal conflict, and that's unnecessary. What I would say to women is to identify the game, learn the rules, and get good at it. Get really, really good at playing that game. And you know, women can sometimes be conniving creatures, and we can be really good at playing the game. But I think you just have to get it in your head that that's what it is. It's very, very easy to take politics personally. I think that many of us have probably been guilty of doing it at least once or twice on really crummy days. I know I have. But you have to put it aside and be willing to look at the issues and look at how you can beat the other side at playing the game. And I think that that's the whole key to it, is understanding that the conflict isn't directed at you. They don't think that you're a terrible human being, and they don't think that all of the things that are printed in the newspaper articles about you are completely accurate. But you simply have to understand that it is a game, and like any game, there are rules, and you can outsmart your competitor and get to the end before they know it.
Okay. Gilda, anything?
I'll yield to.
Oh, I already talked on it, so go ahead.
You mentioned conflict.
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry. Conflict, politics is a contact sport.
Yeah,
Period.
it is.
And what I think is important for women candidates in particular to understand is that you deal with conflict all the time. You just don't call it that. When you're negotiating in your family between two kids who are at war over whatever, that's conflict. I am just a firm believer that there are no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just permanent interests. And when you have that attitude, along with the notion that this is not personal, it kind of helps. I don't have a problem with conflict or confrontation. I think there are times when it's not manageable, when you've got people who take it personally, and so they are not able to separate their emotions from the issue at hand. It becomes problematic. But think about what agitation and conflict does. And I think of someone, I can't remember now, who gave the analogy of a washing machine. And these days there's not a lot of agitation, but in the old days, before these newfangled washing machines that just circulates it, you know, you don't really or couldn't really get clothes clean without some agitation. The same is true of our politics. You've got to have a little agitation before you can really accomplish something that, in my view, is worthwhile. I don't have a problem with conflict, maybe because I've been there so long. And back to Beka's point, I'm used to conflict because I grew up in a family of 7 kids. And I was in the middle. And I always had to kind of negotiate and make sure that my place was secure, because I had those older and those younger who were always vying for their particular place. I think conflict is natural, it's important, and it's all a part of accomplishing whatever.
You want to add something, Joan?
I want to just add one thing. When during the period of time that I was in the legislature, which is admittedly quite a while back, the women from both parties got together, occasionally, one house or another, and we bonded together and we knew one another real well. And we came in to help each other from time to time, and we understood each other and we liked each other for the most part. And I think those personal relationships that you form within the legislature, be they male or female, help you resolve and deal with the conflict so that it's not on such a personal level, but you've got a way to stand up. My good friend Elizabeth Baker was always on the wrong side of the annexation issue. I mean, I represented Topeka and we wanted to annex everything. And she represented Derby, Kansas, and she didn't want anybody bothering her territory. But we got to the point where we could negotiate on that annexation bill. She voted her way, I voted mine, but the conflict didn't impede our ability to get together at other times. So conflict is sometimes just on an issue, and personal relationships go a long way towards helping smooth that out so that it's a comfortable place to be. There are times, however, when you are the loyal opposition or you're the party that has to carry the water on a particular bill, that you're just going to have to put up with conflict. But women have a tendency to stick together and support each other more so than I think men do.
And that's the unique perspective.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to ask you a question with yes or no answer. Can women raise money to run
Yes.
for office?
Yes.
Yes.
Is it hard?
Yes.
Is
Yes.
it hard?
Yes.
Yes.
But it's possible.
Yes.
Yes.
There you go. All right. So if you ever wondered about it, they just told you.
Look
All
at
right?
Jill Docking
Look, oh, they
and
raise
what
money.
she did in the governor's race.
All right, they're raising money. All right, so we want to look at that. The other thing I want to know is, we haven't talked about fun, and we don't have time to talk about fun, but is serving in public office fun?
Yes.
It can be. On some days.
Working in the political arena, is it fun?
It can be on some days.
I guess I had more fun than you all.
Yeah, it's been a minute.
No, don't. I had fun with you because she was my sweet mate when I first got there. We can have fun.
Yeah.
So it's just like any other job, isn't it?
yeah.
It's like
Oh,
any
yeah.
other job. Now, you know what? This is February, Black History Month. Why is Black History Month important to Americans' history? Joan.
I think it's very important that we call attention to the people that have been ignored in history for a very long period of time. And you may not think it's very important that we put up the displays in the Capitol or that we put up the displays in public buildings that call attention to folks that you may never have heard of. But if you're black and feeling disenfranchised, it's really nice to see that there. And for folks like me, it's important to remember that this is a diverse country and that the contributions of blacks and whites and Hispanics and Asians all contribute to the fabric of society that makes the United States what it is.
I think it's really quite simple, regardless of what emotions may be stirred up on either side. The facts are the facts, and history is history, and we ought to know our history. And we ought to know the contributions of all of the people who came before us. And so I think that it's wonderful when we highlight what individuals have done, what communities have done, what individual cultures within our society have been able to achieve. Because I truly believe that none of us stands where we are on our own. We all owe a debt of gratitude to the people who come before us. And so I think that I'm a lover of history and I want to know it all. I want to know about the contributions that were made by Black Americans. I want to know about the contributions made by all Americans. And it's history. It's fact. We ought to know it.
Okay.
Black history is American history, pure and simple. There is no American history without Black history. Unfortunately, it is relegated to 28 days in the month of February by some. I buy into the adage of McDonald's. Black history is 365. Every day of the year is Black history. And when you really delve into the contributions that people of African descent have made to this country, it's a no-brainer. From my perspective, I would, Madam Chair, add to that I feel that same way about the original people, the First Nations, as they say in Canada, and that is the Native Americans, the Hispanics. All people have something to offer, and when you think that your history is the only one that is important, you tend to be, well, you're wrong. It's not. We're all here for a reason, and none of us are going anywhere. And the sooner we all accept that, the better off this country will be.
All right, and the question, what do we call this series? The First Woman President 2.0? And I know you're sitting here wondering, so I'm going to ask them. Is it time for a woman president, and why?
Yes.
All right, and I'll get an affirmative, but I want them to answer. Joan, start with you.
Absolutely, it is time. We have maybe more than one Democratic candidates, at least one or possibly two Republican women candidates who are exemplary. And I think the country is tired of the pattern that we've been on, and I think they see women as much more of problem solvers and not so much stand in the corner and throw bricks at the other side. And it is absolutely time, and I intend to work myself to death until we elect one.
Well, not to death, Joan.
No, well, my fingers to the bone? Okay,
That's better.
I'm not going to quit till we get there.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. It's time for a woman president. It's been time for a woman president. And when people tell me that it's not time for a woman president, I say, well, we've given a long list of men the opportunity to screw up the country. Why not a woman?
Well said, Becca.
I want you to know she was a student here at the Dole Institute. Go ahead.
I concur with what both of these ladies have said. I mean, you guys, no offense to y'all, I like guys and all of that, but y'all have had way enough time to screw up the country. You haven't seen a war you don't like sending other people's sons and daughters to. I think women would do a better job, quite frankly, because we are more apt to be consensus builders. We are not as ego-driven as men tend to be. And I just think that we care about the country as a whole. And it's not so much about a one-upmanship and all the stuff that tends to drive men to whatever it drives y'all to. So I'm ready for a woman candidate of either party, but preferably Democrat. No offense.
But Barbara, the important thing is that there are enough women in the pipeline now. And that's the deal. Remember when Shirley Chisholm ran?
Oh,
Yes.
I mean, that was, what, 30-something years ago? We weren't ready at that point. But we have women in the pipeline. Women have been performing in city councils, in school boards, in state legislatures. They've been governors. We've had more women governors than ever before. And we're now at, what, 25% in Congress? And so there is a pool of people that you can pick out. Not all women are going to be as good as the other, as another one, but it's that pipeline is now full, and I think the attitudes of the public have changed. And women are going to have to run on the same footing that men are going to have to run. They're going to have to raise money, they're going to have to be right on the issues, but the opportunity is there, and more power to them.
All right. Anyone for questions? That's right, we got two people with the microphone. Raise your hand, we'll come to you, ask your question.
One right here.
Okay, go ahead.
I just want to say, like, as a guy, there's a lot of things I don't know that women have to go through. Like, as a young person starting to come through this world, I'm figuring out there's a lot of stuff I don't know. I'm sitting in the back because I was late trying to put my hair up in a simple bun, all right? And I want to know. I honestly want to know what's something that women in politics have to go through that I wouldn't otherwise know about. What's the inside scoop? What's something that you've had to overcome that the average me wouldn't know about.
Do you have an obstacle, a challenge?
I ran for the first time in 1982, and I went up to the House Minority Leader and said, I'm going to jump into this race. This is 5 days before Labor Day when the established candidate is dropped out, and asked him for a contribution, and he looked at me like I was nuts and wouldn't give me one as a Democratic nominee. And I think he thought I was some lifeguard from the YWCA instead of the CEO. So there has been a change over the last 30 years in how women candidates are viewed. And that's sometimes what women have to put up with, is that need to prove yourself. Maybe men don't feel that way anymore, but women still feel like I have to go a little harder, a little faster, work a little longer, stay in my office a little later in order to prove that I am worthy.
Okay. What would you say, Beka?
One of my friends likes to say that women have to put in double the effort to be perceived as half as competent. And that's a perpetual frustration, I think, of many women involved in politics, is that you have to dance backwards in high heels when Fred Astaire just had to walk forwards and lead. And I think that it can often be underestimated how difficult that can be and what a hurdle it can be. You know, some women, frankly, they just get sick of trying harder and staying later and doing more and still getting half of the credit. And sometimes we lose great women because they get sick of it and they walk away. They say, I'm done here. And that's to all of our detriment when that happens. But I understand where they're coming from because it's mighty frustrating.
I would say one of the things I've had to deal with that you probably never will have to deal with is this notion of belonging and questioning why you're there. And I say that through the lens of a woman of color. I have to deal with people who are shocked that I can put two sentences together. And so they are always amazed, and you hear this, oh, you're so articulate, which, by the way, is not a compliment to people of color. Just the notion of being a woman in a man's world. I am the ranking member on the Ways and Means Committee, so men are always fascinated by the questions that I ask about money and about numbers. And you think about women running households, we know about money. You know, we know a lot about money, particularly when we don't have it. So from my perspective, just the notion that I am somehow out of my league, not necessarily out of my league, but I am somehow perceived as different or unique because I have to be a woman of color who understands numbers, who is logical, analytical, not emotional, all that stuff rolled into one, if that makes sense.
All right. Another question? Yes.
From the 60s to the 90s, women went in state legislatures, and I'm talking about specifically, which is really the farm team for most of American politics, went from very few to about 20-25%, and then it stagnated at around 20-25%. What do you think how would you explain that over the last 20-25 years?
I've thought about that a lot. I was part of that wave in the early 80s that doubled. In the 70s, there were 4 women in the Kansas House, and it doubled by the end of the 70s to 9, and then the year that I got elected, we suddenly had 18, and then 10 years later, we had 36, and then it's dropped down from that. I think the newness of having women in legislative positions has kind of worn off a little bit with the public, and a lot of women just don't want to put up with the crap. Pardon me, but I didn't think of any better way to express it.
I think those are fair statements. And hi, Professor Loomis. It's good to see you again. Always enjoyed your classes. I think that it goes back to some of the things that we've talked about. You know, sometimes women get involved in politics and then, like Joan said earlier, the timing in their life changes. And sometimes women get sick of doing twice the work and getting half the glory. But I think that what we need to look at is how we can continue to keep bringing new women in, or perhaps re-engage women that were once involved, have stepped back to focus on caring for elderly parents or moving their small business to a new community or whatever the case may be that took them out of the political world, and bringing them back in and re-engaging them. Because that's what we have to do in order to bring new women in, and in order to keep the women that we have, is to address the structural problems that we've talked about all night long. Because I think those are the true barriers that keep women from getting in, and I think they're the frustrations that they face that result in women getting out.
I think the numbers have dropped because, quite frankly, it's a lot tougher in some areas for women to win because of all that we've said, incumbency, money, all of that. It's not fun anymore. For a lot of women, they look at the perception is that all we do is fight. I would add that the partisan nature of our politics has driven men and women from wanting to be involved. And just, there are so many options available to women now who want to make a difference that were not there, say, 15, 20 years ago. All of those things, I believe, have contributed to the decline in the number of women who have chosen to run and who have been successful in winning elections.
And I would make one comment. We used to have more women in the House. And with a lot of the women retiring, they did not have other women running in that district. So they were no longer in that pipeline, but they were there before. If they had replaced themselves, maybe that would have happened too. But I think all of those reasons are valid. Another question? Go ahead.
If I could just add to that, I have been at this long enough to know that it is simply not enough to say we need more women running and winning. Quite frankly, my experience has shown me that I would much rather have a progressive thinking male than some Stepford, no offense, but some woman who's just going to be in there to do whatever some guy tells her to do, as opposed to using her own mind and intellect to look at the issue, look at her district, and do what's best for the district, as opposed to some partisan position. So I'm all for women running, but I have been at this long enough to know that that in and of itself is not enough. And I would add the lens of women of color. We really need to expand the conversation to encourage not just women to run, but women of color to run. Because the more diverse voices you have at the table, the better the solution that you'll come up with, in my opinion.
And research verifies that, by the way. All right? Oh, right.
Yeah.
Oh,
Claire has a
no,
question.
you call it. Go ahead.
Oh, no, Claire.
Okay, Claire.
Thank you for this evening. I just think that a bit of history should also be reciting. You know, some great minds feel like we have really led the progress in history to have democracies. And now, you know, England has had a prime minister who is not a male. Germany's rather prominent with a female leader. And you know, it's these great leaders. And India, by the way, is also in that list. The United States must be behind something, I think.
Yes, we are.
You touched something that has been bothering me probably more than the issue of getting people to run. That is this whole bickering and absolute partisanship that's gotten to be such a cancer on our news and the stories we get out of Washington and even sometimes from Topeka.
Anybody want to comment on that?
Well, I do think it's beyond bickering. Bickering is kind of what happens at the city council when they go nee, 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 nee. What we've got is a real standoff in Congress that has absolutely paralyzed that institution. And we are close to getting in that direction, although I would certainly want to hear what Barbara had to say about that in the Kansas legislature in terms of stalemating certain issues because positions are hardened. If you look at the country, even the whole country is dividing itself into red states and blue states along ideological lines in times. And I'm not sure that the camaraderie, the free and open debate, the kind of problem-solving atmosphere that existed when I was serving in the legislature or others in that same time period really exists there now. And that is the biggest turnoff in terms of the parties being able to recruit candidates. They don't want to go. You know, you might win. They'd make you go to the Kansas legislature and sit there while they argue over a lot of issues that are not solving the budget problems, that are not fixing our schools, that are not doing the things that we believe are important. And Congress is even worse. I would never think about running for Congress. I'm past the point of running for Congress at this point, but I wouldn't do it because the atmosphere is so poisonous and so it makes you, it's just so difficult to function. And I think we're paying a price as a country for the kind of stalemate that we see. So pardon my soapbox, but maybe you want to.
I just want to add to that one thing that I found over and over consistently in over 23 states nationwide when I've talked to candidates about running for office is that even if you convince that candidate that their voice is needed, even if I convince all of you sitting here today that you need to run for office, I can guarantee you that I'm going to lose 70% of you when you go home and you talk to your spouse. Because what happens is the spouse says, and this is man or woman, husband or wife, the spouse says, I don't want you getting dragged through that mud. I don't want to watch that. I don't want to see that. I don't want our kids to see that. And we lose candidates because not only do they perhaps not want to be involved in this nasty political environment that we have, but even if they're willing to do so, sometimes their spouses are not. And so I think that there's a responsibility upon each and every one of us, and that it starts with each and every one of us, to not vilify our enemy, to not assume that because I differ with an individual on a policy position, we should never assume that that means that they're a bad human being. We should never assume that that means that we can never find common ground. I think that what happens too often is that we vilify the people we disagree with. We otherize them. We say, well, they're different. They could never understand. And so we don't even try to have civil discourse. And that's one thing that I've always loved the Institute for, is that we bring people in here. When I was a student here, as a Republican, I always went to the Democratic study groups for two reasons. I wanted to understand their perspective, and I wanted to get all their secrets so I could beat them at their own game. There is no reason to not talk to people that you disagree with, and there's no excuse, none, to vilify them.
But that's not happening in the legislature today, is it? I mean, you're there lobbying on a daily basis. Am I wrong in my understanding?
At every level, I even believe on the local level, I believe that political discourse is becoming less civil and more toxic. And I believe that that is true from the local level to the state level to the national level. And I think that the only way to stop it is for each of us to take responsibility for changing it within ourselves and in the conversations and interactions that we are personally responsible for.
Excellent answer. Go ahead.
There's not a lot I can add. I'm one for always, as I said earlier, quite frankly, we need to look in the mirror. As Pogo said, we've looked at the enemy and it is us. This partisan nature of our politics is because we have allowed it to be so. It's our person and the other person is bad, as my two colleagues here have mentioned. We have got to take ownership individually and collectively of where we are in our politics and how we got there. It didn't happen overnight, and it didn't just happen. When we vilify somebody who disagrees with us, when we make somebody who shares a different view somehow a monster or other or different, we are all contributing to the demise of civil discourse. I would have to say to you, Joan, that in the South Carolina legislature, it is very divided, very partisan. It is not helped by people on either side who have taken their cues from the national level and are partisan. It's like if you don't have an R or a D by your name, you have no value. We are at a point in the South Carolina General Assembly, because Republicans are in the majority, that if you want to get a bill passed, you have to find a Republican to sponsor it, because nowadays it doesn't count if you are not in the majority. That is a real sad testament to the country we live in. What is so interesting to me, being a student who studies behavior, is watching men and women at the federal level all claim to speak for the American people. You know how politicians, the American people, and I wonder how many different kinds of American people do we have? Because everybody's speaking for the American people, but they're all saying different things. What I am very much in favor of saying, particularly to young people, is forget the old people, myself included. You are living in a world that is extremely different from that of your parents. You owe it to yourself to get out of your comfort zone, to meet people who think differently, who look differently, because sheer demographics dictate that by the time you are large and in charge, you are going to be with people who look different than you do, who think differently. And quite frankly, I am so discouraged on some days by how America is doing its business. We have lost our competitive edge. We're not teaching our students, our children, about science, because it is now politically correct to deny whatever we don't agree with. Think about it just from a bottom line standpoint, and I'm way off the point of the question, but here's the point I want to make. We've lost our competitive edge as a country. We really have. And if you have children and grandchildren, you need to care about this country's standing in the world, because we are no longer the superpower that we once were. We are so busy hating everybody who looks different, who thinks different, that there is no room for us to do anything other than hate. Think about that. Hate is an energy and emotion that requires a whole lot of your time and concentration. And when you're busy hating on people for whatever reason, that means you are not focused on something more constructive, in my view. Whew. I'm sorry. You asked me to come.
I did ask
Now
you to
listen,
come.
y'all, the views you hear here are my own. Please don't hold that against Dr. Ballard, because she is a friend of mine and thought y'all needed to hear some Southern accents up in here.
Don't worry, I have no worries. No worries. Yes. Oh, you have a question as well?
I notice in these last few responses a more pessimistic trend than was evidenced in the first part of the panel this evening. And I'm aware that that if you look at the global picture, there are certainly in evidence a number of females who are national leaders that play an important role across the globe. But I'm also aware that there is a profound movement afoot in the world that would put women in a disadvantaged and subjective and submissive role again. That the whole terrorist movement, ISIS and others, are very much concerned about this Western notion of women equality. So I would ask you, do you see yourselves on the side of history? Or if you do, then how are you going to, as an advocate for women's role in public life, how are we going to get out of this dilemma that you have just described in the last few responses that would suggest that things are getting harder and that everything is going perhaps to hell in a handbasket?
Let me say do it briefly because I'm going to take one more question. Okay, so answer this briefly and then we have one more question. Go ahead. We're going to let Beka
See, a man would never look at each other like we're doing.
I think women have to write our own history. I think that Americans have to write our own history. I think that young people have to write our own history. And if we want a world that is more positive, a world that has equality for women, a world that has all of the things that we care about, I think it's up to each and every one of us. And that doesn't mean we all run for political office. Maybe it means that you spend 2 hours on a Saturday making phone calls for a candidate that you care about. Maybe it means opening up your Rolodex and calling 10 of your best friends and saying, hey, my friend's running for office, can you contribute $50? But we all have a role to play, and I think that the only way to make things better is that we each get up off our duff and we do the work.
Okay.
I think we've seen a lot of change since the 60s in terms of the women's rights movements and changes that have uplifted women, and I think some of the emerging trends in the Middle East where women are being subjugated and wearing those kinds of clothes portend a conflict that's coming. Here's my bottom line. There is absolutely nothing that is guaranteed about keeping freedom once you've earned it. And if you don't work on it all the time, if we don't have every young woman that's coming out as committed as you are, and they aren't all as committed as you are, unfortunately, to getting involved in doing things, then we will lose what we've gained. And we have a lot of women that have gone before us, a lot of men and women who fought for social change, but it can be eroded in an instant. So I think eternal vigilance is the price of that freedom.
And I would just say to you, I hope I'm not the one who is given the impression of being of pessimism. I see myself as a very optimistic, glass half full kind of person. We just have to stay focused and keep doing it, and just keep doing it. And I agree with what both these ladies have said. You just got to do it, like
Okay.
Nike.
Like Nike?
Yeah.
Oh, we have another one. How many more questions do we have? Let me see your hands up so I know. Oh, my goodness.
Oh, my.
We'll
Give
short
shorter answers. Yeah.
Short, okay.
Shorter answers.
Okay, short.
Since the middle of the 1990s, the internet has allowed anyone and everyone to vet candidates anonymously. What impact does that have for the future in terms of candidacies?
Tremendous impact. Technology, period, on both sides, both from a positive and a negative.
The biggest impact is that it's changed the way that we communicate. All the old strategies that I know how to teach people are different when you start thinking about social media. So we've all got to learn, those of us that have been doing this for a long time, how to communicate in a different way. Those young people that are coming in already figured it out. But the internet has just made everything totally different. The other thing that's out there is that every word you've ever said that's in print is going to come back and haunt you. So you really got to clean up your act.
Okay.
Every word you've ever said in print or text or Snapchat or Instagram or Facebook or tweet or anything else.
All right, keep it. You know, we have lots and lots of questions. Let's make them quick, but I don't know if we can take them all right here.
I'm going to jump in here and be the first woman to ask a question. I don't know if anybody else has noticed that or not, but any rate, I think the four of you should take this on the road. It's been excellent. And I have to ask a brief question to Joan because I can't believe that you have been the only female mayor in the history of Topeka. That's unbelievable, and I don't know what, there's no answer to it, I'm sure, but it just stuck in my mind. That's unbelievable.
154 years.
Can you think of somebody? Joan,
Yeah.
are you the first secretary?
I am the only woman that has ever been the mayor of Topeka, yes.
Secretary of Revenue
Oh,
as
and
well.
I'm not the only woman who's ever been Secretary of Revenue or Chairman of the Tax Committee. There were 3 women. One was a Republican that was chair of the Tax Committee, and several people have been Secretaries of Revenue.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
Quickly about in support of women as leaders. I'll hold it. Thank you. And from a very different vantage point, I've been, and not so much a question as a comment or observation, I've been fortunate over the past 40 years to have worked in both adult psychiatric settings and children's psychiatric settings. And the observation over that time is this. In the adult psychiatric settings, most of the leaders and doctors were men. In the children's psychiatric settings, there were more women doctors, more women as leaders. In the adult setting, when the leaders got together for their weekly meeting, the agenda often was consciously or unconsciously, who's got the most authority, who's got the most power, what is the hierarchy here. In the children's setting, which was led more by women, it was ultimately what is in the best interest of the child, period. Which fits with the research that's out there and what some of you have commented on, that women lead by collaboration and relationships, and men lead with other kinds of agenda. The world would certainly be a very different and better place with more women in leadership positions.
Thank you so very much.
We concur.
Very nice. All right. Do we have everyone now? Oh, this last one here, please.
Okay, I'll be the second woman to ask a question. I actually had lots of questions, and so I just decided I'll ask this one. And it may be a bit too much, but I am not in politics. I'm an educator, teacher at University of Kansas. So I see myself as helping to shape people's ideas, think critically, develop into more articulate individuals, all that kind of stuff. So one of the trends that I'm seeing, and I just want to ask you to comment about, is that we are in fact looking for ambitious people. We are looking for people with certain characteristics. It's almost like the commodity culture of athletics has entered into politics. We're training people early to be good, civic-minded, political people. They enter in school and college doing that, just as we put children into basketball camps and want them to become good basketball players. Is this something we should be concerned about in terms of how we are tracking people into a system? Is that going to make it worse or better for some of the things you've described here? The tremendous conflict, confrontational, lack of civil discourse. So I'm wondering if that competition element, that search for drive, that search for passion, looking for people really, really early to enter into politics, is that something we should be concerned about? You represent different generations of entry into the political process on the stage.
And we think so. And we did that
On
deliberately.
purpose, right.
We did it
So, but
deliberately.
I'm the educator on the other end looking at
so
how
narrow
we
down,
attract.
what's your question?
The tracking of young people into the political arena in a sort of commodified fashion, a trend. Do you see that as a trend? Is it something to be concerned about?
I want to find people to go into politics that have the broadest possible range of experiences. So I don't think we're tracking them into politics. What we want to teach is leadership skills, whether it's in sports, whether it's in Girl Scouts, whether it's in academic performance, wherever. And it's the leadership skills that you learn that translate into being successful in politics. And the more you know, the more experiences you've had, the better leader you're going to be and the more successful you'll be.
Okay, I concur.
I agree. I don't think we're tracking young people into politics. And on the point about ambition, because I think I raised that, I'm not concerned about ambitious people. What I am concerned about are ambitious people with no core, with no principle, no integrity, no character. Those are the kinds of ambitious people who concern me.
All right, with that, you know, I'm amazed how many of you didn't leave. I mean, when it got to be the time, because we always go a little bit longer, but thank you so much. And I want you to know, these are 3 of my favorite people. And I'm just really happy that Bill and I could share them with you this evening. So thank you.
Thank you.